longer be the chief.
I've been searching far and wide, searching for answers beyond the great divide. I've been looking deep within, looking to find what's always been inside of me. I've been looking deep inside of me, looking to find what's always been inside of me. Lord knows I'm not getting any younger. I'm getting older every day. 30-some years gone by so fast. Can't get the time to stay. This world keeps spinning faster and faster, and with all the sadness, with just one big disaster that comes together, spinning, come together, come together, yeah. Just one big disaster comes together, spinning, come
One of the pleasures of having this symposium is the keynote speaker. The person that's going to be replacing me here in just a minute is someone who's very unique in the sense that he has one of the few dissertations on a motorsports-related topic, which is quite remarkable. Dan Simone, his current position is as the curator at the NASCAR Hall of Fame Museum in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he's taken up that task, and we're really hoping he'll be there for many years. And so, Dan, yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to give this keynote this afternoon. I must say I'm flattered to have the opportunity to give this address. Many of you out there in the audience, you've been studying motorsports history much longer than I have, and so the fact that you've asked me to come up here means a lot, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Today I'm going to talk just a little bit about my background and my work at the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And I also hope that when I conclude, we can set some time aside, not just for questions, but possibly for discussion as well between us. I think many of us would say that we have pretty clear memories or fond memories of our first race. For me, it was, I was at Nazareth Speedway. It's about 20 years ago now, so Michael Andretti win. But what I remember most about that race was Greg Moore. He was rookie, and he charged his way all the way up to second place. And as I was preparing my remarks today, I thought about one of the unique aspects of what we do as motorsports historians compared to other sports is our heroes sometimes we lose our heroes while we're doing research. We lose our heroes sometimes as we're giving talks and as we're preparing papers. Not quite as common in other sports like baseball, football, and soccer. I think about the drivers that have gotten terribly hurt or lost their lives over the years. And that comes with being a historian. There's always going to be a depressing element, I think, with history as you look back at certain events and different things that have occurred over time. But for me, I look back at that race, and I still remember Greg Moore finishing second, and it was really something to see. Also at about that same time, Professor Mark D. Howell was in the midst of wrapping up his, from Madison to Moonshine Avenue, a cultural history of the Winston Cup Series. I know Mark is with us today, and I want to point out that groundbreaking book because it was it was one of the reasons why, how I realized that maybe I could do this. Mark put out this book 20 years ago now. Not an understatement to say that his book was groundbreaking. And even the title of the book itself reflects what Don mentioned a few moments ago regarding this cultural turn. Motorsports is, by all means, another exciting, important lens in which to view history. Or what I've always tried to keep in mind, and what my first advisor said to me in graduate school, what does this teach us about ourselves? When I went to graduate school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I know I wanted to be a professor, but I wasn't quite sure yet what I wanted to study. I didn't think motorsports would be something that would be accepted. My advisor, he demanded that I provide 4 ideas for a master's thesis. And I had 3 and I couldn't come up with a 4th. And even though I wanted to do something on racing, I almost didn't feel like I should even put it down, because he's probably that's gonna be the throwaway. He's gonna ask me for another 4th one to use. But as it turned out, when we met, he said to me, I have to say that I'm interested in this Red River Valley Speedway idea in West Fargo, North Dakota. Nobody's ever written on this before. And so for the first time, I met somebody in the academic world that was interested or even excited about my topic. And then I realized that there are folks like that out there. It's just a matter of, and most of us have been through this, we have to dig, we have to find them. And so I was lucky to have a thesis advisor in graduate school for my master's who was very supportive. And I learned how to become an historian. I learned how to become a motorsports historian during this time. I learned right away just how difficult it was to find sources. Motorsports history, the sources are often extremely difficult to find. So I relied greatly on interlibrary loan. I also learned how to conduct interviews, oral histories, not just interviews, but oral histories, and learned how to ask probing questions to try to gather more context about some of the different events and races and tracks that I was discussing. And I also had to learn how to write, not from the point of view of being a fan. And 20 years later, I still struggle with this sometimes. It's easy sometimes when you're passionate about something to kind of get caught up in it. And so that was something that I also learned how to do throughout my first few years of studying racing, was how to write it from an academic point of view, not necessarily from a fan's perspective. And I made a lot of nice, good contacts early on, and people that kind of helped me get off the ground. I mentioned Dr. Howell, but also, and I'm going to leave out names, and I apologize, but Steve Zawacki was helpful, Alan Brown, Don Radbrock. Don would love to see what we're doing here today. And there were many others. There was the Yahoo History Group that I know so many of you are familiar with. It's not quite as active now as it was 10 or 15 years ago, but there were a lot of folks on there that are also very helpful. Most of my master's thesis dealt with the IMCA, the International Motor Contest Association. And there I also learned some more pitfalls, that even in the racing world, there doesn't necessarily mean acceptance. I had to convince some racing historians, and even those that were racing enthusiasts. Why is the IMCA important to study? In all likelihood, they were not some, but many of the races were hippodrome. They were fixed races in its earliest years, so it's not necessarily true racing. And so I found myself trying to explain that maybe, despite the fact that the races may not be legitimate, there's still a lot going on that's worthy of studying. But I go back and look at my master's thesis now, and it is here at the center, and it's actually painful to read. I wrote it quite some time ago, and it was important. It kind of set me on my course, but I realized I had a lot further to go, and I did decide that I wanted to try to get a PhD in American history and see if I could pull off writing a dissertation on motorsports. And so I had to find schools and advisors and scholars that would be accepting of my idea and support my idea. As I was looking at different schools to try to go and get my PhD in, and that included applying, it was one thing, but getting accepted was another. I just kept giving papers at academic conferences, and Last night, the PCA came up, and that was an excellent forum for me and others to give motorsports papers. So that association, I think, is definitely worth supporting as we move forward, because I know that there have been more than a handful of racing-based papers that have been given at the PCA. And I kept giving papers, and then I decided to attend the University of Florida, and I had an advisor there, Dr. Jack Davis, who was also very supportive, and he worked with me, and he helped me continue to learn how to write and study, not as a fan, but as a historian and as a motorsports historian. And the key was getting past my comprehensive exams. And I think there are a couple graduate students in the audience that have not taken their comprehensive exams yet. So that's one of the big hurdles. You get through those exams, then you have the opportunity to pursue your dissertation topic. The day I passed my exams, I booked a flight to go to Knoxville, Iowa, where I met with Tom at the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum. And I began doing my research. And then there are other names, there are other folks that I want to just briefly touch on that helped me as I was working on my dissertation. Pete Daniel, Suzanne Wise, Pat Young, Don Capps, Joanna Schrader, Randall Hall. I realized that there was a larger group of us than I originally thought earlier. And there's even more proof of that today. We have a nice sized audience, all sharing the same passion for motorsports history. And so there was somewhat of a balance of optimism and pessimism. I knew there were people out there that were supportive of what I wanted to do and what the rest of us study, but I also knew there were also a lot of people that didn't take us very seriously, and we would remain on the fringe, not just in academia, but even in sport history. I kind of got used to the fact that there are going to be supporters out there, but at the same time, by no means are we considered mainstream, and there's that constant battle to try to legitimatize ourselves as we talk to other professors and other scholars. And most of my training was going to lead me into the classroom, and I did that for quite some time. I taught various history courses, and I enjoy teaching all types of history. It was challenging sometimes to try to tie in motorsports history to the ancient Greeks or to the ancient Romans, although with the chariot races I was able to make somewhat of a connection. The closest I would get to showing an Indy 500 or an F1 event would be the chariot scene from Ben-Hur. So I missed it, and I was hoping for an opportunity, and then finally that opportunity came, and I'm very fortunate, I'm very lucky to be at the NASCAR Hall of Fame. I'm still learning the job. I've only been there just a bit over 6 months, but I'm extremely fortunate. And most jobs that people with motorsports backgrounds wind up taking are in communications, they're in marketing, of course drivers and technology, but there's not quite as many for historians. And so for me, I'm definitely appreciative and thankful and fortunate. A little bit specifically about what I do and what we do at the Hall of Fame. A little bit of a backstory. There was a bidding process that took place a little over 10 years ago. 3 finalists were Daytona Beach, Atlanta, and Charlotte. Charlotte won. However, Atlanta and Daytona Beach both had very strong bids and very strong claims as far as where the Hall of Fame should be located, with the extensive beach racing history at Daytona that goes back to the turn of the century, and also the very rich stock car racing history that Atlanta had, especially in the 30s and 40s. But Charlotte did wind up winning that bid. As far as the birthplace of stock car racing, I guess you could say in America it was in Chicago in 1895. But as far as NASCAR's development in the mid to late 40s, beginning in late 1947 and onward, Charlotte I believe was the correct place for the Hall of Fame, and that's where we are located. We opened in 2010. NASCAR Hall of Fame is actually owned and operated by the city of Charlotte. So I work for the city, and it's licensed by NASCAR. So there's a little bit of a couple different dynamics that go into the Hall of Fame. We were created to honor one specific type of motorsport under one specific sanctioning body. So even though there are certainly other forms of stock car racing, big time stock car racing, AAA racing or USAC racing, and so on, we devote our focus almost entirely to NASCAR history. And that keeps us restricted, but at the same time that keeps us focused. In some ways we're the opposite of the International Motor Racing Research Center, where this is a research facility. There are artifacts here as well. We're the opposite. We're strictly a museum. We do have holdings. We do have a permanent collection. It's growing. We've only been open for just over 6 years, so little by little we're acquiring different artifacts and different items. And we're gradually moving into becoming more of a collection-based facility, and that's a big part of what I do. Is I'm also trying to help increase our holdings and try to acquire more primary source documents, more artifacts, not just trophies and helmets and driver suits, but also correspondence, rare programs, other types of racing memorabilia that needs to be preserved and protected. Because as many of you know, if you go into maybe a used bookstore or even a garage sale, you never quite know what's going to turn up, what you might find. And what's sometimes horrifying as a historian or as somebody that works at a museum is the conditions that you find some of these materials in, the old boxes, and things are falling apart. And so we try to bring items into the Hall of Fame, and then we also, like many other museums and motorsports museums, we try to preserve the different materials that we acquire. I'm also helping put together new exhibits. I do a great deal of networking, of course. I do a great deal of research. I do a great deal of writing at the Hall of Fame. I have a team that I report to, or a director that I report to. His name is Kevin Schlieser. He's the director of our exhibits team. And he has a vast museum background, but he also has an expertise in automobiles, and antique automobiles. And my team reports to him, and then Kevin reports to Winston Keldy, who's the executive director at the Hall of Fame, and many of you are familiar with him for a couple of reasons, most notably his work on the radio over the last couple of decades. In addition to me, myself serving as the curator, we have an historian as part of my team, Buzz McKim. What Buzz does, he is what I like to say in the inner circle. And so he knows personally countless drivers and other racing personalities, going way back even to the late 40s and 50s. And so having him makes my job easier, because I know a decent amount of motorsports history and NASCAR history, but Buzz been around the sport his entire life. He's able to help us a great deal with not just the history, but also with contacts. We have a collections manager who wears numerous hats. Kevin Larrabee is our collections manager. He is an archivist. He's a registrar. He moves cars. He also is often responsible for bringing in artifacts and bringing those artifacts back to the donors. We hesitate to have materials shipped to us. We much would rather pick up those items personally and make sure that they're safely transported back and forth. What makes his job difficult, and I would venture to say this is also a problem that other motorsports museums tend to face, is loan agreements vary. So some items might be on loan for a couple of months, others might be on loan for a couple of years, some might be on loan for an indefinite period. So there's a great deal of record keeping that he has to keep track of all the different artifacts, but at the same time he has those other duties that I just mentioned. So we have somewhat of a unique system at the Hall of Fame. And then
a small, in comparison to our loaned artifacts, we have a small permanent collection. That's because there's so many items that are in and out. And a lot of our, a lot of the people that we honor, and a lot of the people that are included in the different exhibits, they have varying commitments to their artifacts. There are some drivers, for example, that they'll give us stuff and they'll say, nah, just keep it out, till whenever. And then there are other drivers who they'll donate something and then they'll come back to the Hall of Fame maybe a year later and say, I kind of want my stuff back. So it varies a great deal between personalities and people's different commitments to their items, their artifacts, their helmets, their driver's suits, and trophies and flags, etc. At the Hall of Fame, we have greatly committed and extended our outreach in the area of education. And so the hire before myself, Eliza Russell is our education manager. And what she has been able to do, and she continues to do, is expand our outreach. Because of course, we want motorsports fans to come to the Hall of Fame. We want NASCAR fans to come to the Hall of Fame. But we also want other people to start coming to the Hall of Fame. Not necessarily want to make new fans, that would be nice, but we're committed to trying to help people that aren't motorsports fans. Going back to that cultural turn, or what does this teach us about ourselves? We try to give that experience to people that walk through our doors, even if they don't enjoy the sport or are fans of the sport. There's a great deal they can learn. And so what she has done, what Eliza Russell has done, is expanded our outreach. And she's developed a curriculum with schools, a state-based curriculum with schools in North Carolina, but also extending into South Carolina, Virginia, and even I believe we've had school groups from Georgia. So the NASCAR Hall of Fame is moving into becoming an educational provider as well. We're trying to extend our reach to public schools, but also the private schools. There's an emphasis on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEAM, if you include arts with that. So we're pitching this to teachers and to schools, and so they can bring their students to the Hall of Fame, and a lot of their learning objectives can be fulfilled through field trips. So it's not just a matter of the kids running around the museum and checking out the neat cars and the cool helmets, but instead there's a strong educational focus. So the Hall of Fame the NASCAR Hall of Fame is endeavoring to try to use our artifacts and our resources as teaching tools for teachers. And it's been successful. We're on our second year, and percentage-wise, we have a much larger percent of our attendance coming from school groups. And we also have found that there's a large percentage of those school groups coming back for a second year. There's also been evidence that there are school groups coming from further outside of Charlotte to the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And so I mentioned this not necessarily because I do want to talk about some of the good work that my team is doing, but also even though I'm talking more specifically about elementary school students and grammar school students, it does tie into this notion of what does motorsports teach us about ourselves. And so that's something that we're very actively trying to pursue at the Hall of Fame. And that's not just limited to children. We're also trying to apply that to general visitors. We're trying to create opportunities to capitalize on NASCAR and on the sport, not necessarily to make new fans, although that would be nice, but to also help adults understand what we can learn from NASCAR, what we can learn from motorsports. And we had an exhibit that throughout the summer that was recently replaced. We're honoring Tony Stewart. He's retiring this year from NASCAR. But until the Tony Stewart exhibit went in a couple weeks ago, there was a Spark exhibit. And what Spark was, it was an interactive 8-station interactive exhibit that combined different elements of the sport, physics, fuel, motion. And these little stations, there was an interactive braking ramp. There were balloon-powered race cars. There was we had a small simulated wind tunnel, and we also had a cutaway engine. Roush Yates Racing gave us an engine, which was really terrific. So we have a Roush Yates engine that we're able to show not just kids but also adults how a NASCAR engine works and operates. And so these are just some of the different things that we've moved into. You come to the NASCAR Hall of Fame, and of course we have a lot of cars, we have a lot of trophies, and programs and posters and those types of things. But we're also trying to increase awareness. So we're trying to develop motorsports as a tool, an educational tool for both children and adults. And so that's just a little bit about what we do and the direction that we're headed in at the NASCAR Hall of Fame, and a little bit regarding my background. Now, for the rest of my time, I just want to talk a little bit more about how my work and how the NASCAR Hall of Fame connects and intersects with everybody here. How do we all, how does this all fit in? I do have handouts that I wanted to give to everybody. I believe I have enough. Tom, thank you. So how's the NASCAR Hall of Fame fit into our symposium today? Well, we all share a passion for motorsports history, regardless if it's NASCAR stock cars, tractor trailers driving backwards through the Colombian streets, etc. We all share a passion for motorsports history. So how do we continue to do this? How do we continue to intersect and connect and collaborate, not just amongst ourselves, but how do we spread the word? How do we get out there and build on this very impressive and successful gathering in the years to come? As I was preparing some of my remarks today, I was thinking about NASCAR's formation in December of 1947. All these racing figures come together in Daytona, and eventually a sanctioning body is created, and that we're approaching our 70-year anniversary of NASCAR being created. It's one of the few sanctioning bodies that's permanent, that's been around a long time. And so I was trying to connect that to us. This is year number 2. How do we make this something that's going to continue and last for years to come? And how do we build on it? How do we make it stronger? How do we add? How do we make the audience larger in years to come? I see a lot of opportunity. You know, I don't know if I ever, up until recently, thought something like this could really happen. It's been very exciting for me, and I know it's been exciting for a lot of us. Excuse me. Just want to share some other observations I've had over the years regarding what we do as motorsports historians. And I know some of us, we study other areas of history, and we have other scholarly interests too and other passions. But what I've found is in the sport history realm, there are a lot of terrific books written on different topics in sport history. But it's amazing how few touch on racing. Nearly all stick and ball sports could be addressed in a book, in a particular book. Everything from baseball to basketball, lacrosse, hockey, and so on. But what I've often find is that motorsports, and not in all cases, but in many cases, is overlooked. It's not in that same conversation. And I would argue that in some cases, excellent books written on sport history might be even better if they did include, at least touched a little bit on motorsports, as they're talking about how sports developed in certain cities or in different parts of the world. On the other hand, I can also sympathize with sports historians because touching on racing can also lead to rabbit holes. there are so many different types of racing, and so many different surfaces, so many different types of cars. So I'm not quite sure what our goal should be here, or what my specific goal is. Should sport history books include auto racing as part of the conversation? Possibly. Am I shooting for more academic acceptance from some of our associates in other areas and other fields? Perhaps, but what I've kind of come to the conclusion is that I think we need to, more than just anything else, take care of ourselves. And we're doing that. We're doing that today. This weekend, we have 11 papers. There are symposia that address other topics that are taking place this weekend that probably don't have 11 papers. So we're definitely on the grow. We're definitely developing. And one of the really exciting things about us is the fact that we have so much to offer in the diversity of our different backgrounds, the different types of racing that we study and that we have interest in, and just an excellent cross-section of those different interests are being represented this weekend. A lot of us for many years have waited, and we've been frustrated trying to get more into the mainstream. Seems like technology scholars in many cases do not want us. Sport historians do not want us. Even automobile scholars in many cases do not want us. So I think where I would start placing more of my focus, and I think we should consider, is just, again, worrying more about ourselves. I think building on this successful conference that we've enjoyed up till now, and that we still have, I believe, 6 more papers to go. We're not even halfway there yet today. We're unique. There's only one type of baseball. Unless you include the dimensions of the outfield, baseball, it's 90 feet. 90 feet to first base. 2 types of football. Canadian football has a larger end zone and there's a 55-yard line. But football is pretty much football. Hockey is pretty much hockey. Soccer is pretty much soccer. And basketball is, it's basketball. The hoop is 10 feet above the floor. Different cars, different tracks, different race surfaces, trucks driving backwards, auto polo, spaces, places, Colombia, Cuba, the United States. It's just, there's such a rich areas to just study, and I think we've only scratched the surface. We continue to have meetings like this year in and year out. There's going to be no shortage of topics. There's going to be no shortage of exciting ideas and presentations. So I think that one of the strongest elements of us, those of us that are gathered here today, and even those that are unable to make it today, is we represent lots of different interests in motorsport. And some of us are not academics, some of us are not scholars, some of us do not have PhDs or master's degrees. I don't know if that necessarily means that there should not be inclusion of those who do not have those advanced degrees. Because good work is good work. And I wouldn't want to see our membership, those that attend our conference or our symposia, to be just limited to academics. Because good work is certainly good work. And I can say over the years that I've learned a lot from racing enthusiasts too, over time. Just as I've also learned a lot from doing research here. I don't know if I would have been able to finish my dissertation if I wasn't able to come here and do research a couple times. Or the Appalachian State University Library collection that Suzanne Wise takes care of down in Boone, North Carolina. So there are opportunities to learn about racing history also from different sources and from different areas. Those many different types of motorsports historians, just as if throughout the history of our sport, there have always been sanctioning bodies. And in many cases, sanctioning bodies disagree with one another. The history of our sport, one could argue, is essentially just a nonstop squabbling between sanctioning bodies. It goes all the way back over 100 years now. So I don't necessarily want to say we're factions among us that are fighting, but when I talk about sanctioning bodies, there's also that theme of them not lasting very long. NASCAR is one that's lasted a long time. The NHRA, that's been around a long time. But many sanctioning bodies do not last very long in comparison to, say, Major League Baseball or the NFL. I want to make it clear, I'm not advocating secession. The SAH is I know that they've been very instrumental in this, and I know that there's an excellent collaborative effort taking place. So I'm certainly not trying to advocate secession, but I'm also trying to just kind of push forward the notion of how can we develop from here. And I handed out some ideas, some things that we can talk about, some things that we can discuss after my time on the podium, but also going on. We still have we have 6 more papers today, and we're gonna get together for dinner. And some of the things that I outlined for you, I'm hoping that we can discuss. Questions over could we have the meeting at other venues at some point, maybe a little bit further on? If so, where would those meetings take place? Does it have to be once a year? Could it be twice a year? Maybe once a year here every year, but then maybe another time during the year it rotates and we meet in different parts of the country. Maybe establish a website that's maintained from time to time. This is a free event. Is it worth considering moving on if this might be something that we should consider dues or a fee to attend the conference? As far as outreach, we have some graduate students here. Should we look forward and try to bring even more graduate students to further meetings? And then thinking a little bit more in terms of what many of the formal associations do. In motorsports history, do we consider establishing book awards, outstanding paper awards, or outstanding graduate student paper awards, graduate student travel awards, an annual lifetime achievement award? And now, I do understand this requires work, and it requires money. And in the museum world, money is, of course, that's something that's always had to be kept in the back of one's mind. But these are just some ideas that I would like us to talk about, because I think there are enough of us here today that these types of awards are something that we could put into place at some point. Maybe not in 2017, but maybe a few years from now. And then I met with Don a couple weeks ago, and I know Pat has also expressed the idea of maybe considering to endeavor a journal, having a journal devoted to motorsports history, a scholarly journal that still has widespread appeal. So we're not just tapping into one small specific audience, but a journal that's kind of set up in a way where non-academics could also benefit and enjoy reading that journal. Excellent papers this year. I did not attend last year, but I know there were 3 papers from last year. Perhaps some of the panelists might consider submitting their presentations, tweak them a little bit, and then submit them for possible journal publication if they haven't considered maybe submitting them elsewhere. Maybe that's something we could talk about, maybe trying to develop some type of a journal. And book reviews. There are plenty of books coming out on a yearly basis where I think a book review section of a journal would be an excellent idea. That number could vary. There could be 4 book reviews, one issue, 10 another issue. Of course, that would require a book review editor. So again, I'm being realistic. I know that this is something that takes work and it takes money, but I think there are enough of us that would be interested in writing book reviews on motorsports books as they come out. And I think an article discussing how this happened today would make an excellent journal article for the first issue. What were the different steps and what was the process behind bringing us all together this weekend, and also for the inaugural meeting last year. And so what next? I think the sooner the venue and date can be decided on for the next meeting, I think the better. I think we should try to increase our outreach and try to let other people know about the success of this gathering, and give people plenty of heads up in advance, so they can set up their schedules based on having this meeting in 2017 or 2018 and so forth. We should continue participating. We should continue our discussions. We should continue our outreach. I encourage everyone here, as we move forward after my talk, and to bring some of their experiences from attending other conferences and other symposia to this symposium. What worked for them, what didn't work, what they liked, what they didn't like. We can learn from other associations, from other gatherings as we move forward. And then I want to end by saying what I started with, the question that sticks with me, and that I would hope sticks with you as we wrap things up later on today and go back to the classroom or back to the museums or wherever else that we're heading back to. Motorsports. What does it teach us about ourselves? Thank you very much. You're going to volunteer to be the book review editor?
Talked about outreach to schools. Have you thought about outreach to local universities or colleges, maybe with internships for students, or trying to partner perhaps industry departments?
Yes, that's one of the other duties that I have, something I've tried to bring with me. Again, I've only been there about 6 months. But I have that process is sort of underway for us in areas as far as interns, places like UNCC Charlotte, Winthrop, and some of the other local universities and colleges, graduate students, but even undergrads. We're trying to create, and we do have internship opportunities. So that's something that we do want to try to continue to grow as we move forward. And there's two ways of doing it. One is they could be hired as part-time, but the system that we would rather implement, and as we collaborate with other colleges and universities, is credit-based internships where it'd be 3 or 6 credits. And so that's something that we're in the early stages of developing. And I think that's important. I think that's to our advantage, but it's also to the advantage of those students at those different places, those different colleges. Pat?
Do the teams, do the NASCAR teams themselves, the owners, express any interest in providing funding for internships?
It's,
Their level of enthusiasm.
yeah, I think I really can't speak on behalf of specific teams and drivers, and I don't deal with the present day teams very often. Once in a while there will be a driver or somebody coming through the Hall of Fame, so I don't deal with them. You know, sometimes I'll run into somebody, but usually it's the Hall of Famers, it's the older generation that I work with on a day in and day out basis. But there are certainly, from what I've heard, especially from the educational standpoint, there are teams and drivers that are committed to trying to get kids interested in racing, to get kids interested in NASCAR. So that's something that, not speaking specifically for any one or two drivers, but that's something I think in general that they understand. It's good for the Hall of Fame, but it's also good for the sport, increasing awareness and also teaching motorsports history as a way to learn American history, as a way to learn history of technology. physics, chemistry, and other different components of curriculum.
What are you doing so far, or have done, to reach out to millennials and the sooner crowd?
As I was saying a little earlier, it's a little bit different with the adults, and then when you're talking about millennials, we're talking about those that are in their 20s, I guess, or early 30s. We're trying to bring people into the Hall of Fame so they walk out not necessarily as being bigger fans of the sport, but also having learned something through a different lens. And I think millennials tend to be more open about that. The millennials tend to be a little more experimental in a lot of ways. They tend to be unconventional. They will embrace alternative ways of learning, so to speak. And so we apply that as we try to develop our public programs moving forward, not just to bring more kids to the Hall of Fame, more children, but also adults regardless of age. We were open that the next day. We suffered no damage. We did lose a window. There was a broken window, but our artifacts, everything was secured. And it was important for us to be open the next day because a lot of the city did shut down. But there were people that were in town that were there for conferences or sightseeing, and we wanted to make sure that they still had the opportunity to visit us. And so we were lucky. There were definitely some buildings in the Uptown area that were damaged extensively, but we were fortunate in that we had minimal damage. Yeah, I know, and we struggled with that that day and even the next couple of days because we would get calls from friends and family and colleagues saying, well, "How's everything going down there?" And the media, we're part of a much bigger complex. The Charlotte Convention Center is also connected to the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And so there was a decent amount of damage surrounding us. And the media, a lot of the media outlets, they set up their vans and their technology right by the Hall of Fame. And so when they were making some of their reports, I think they alluded to the fact that we specifically took a lot of damage, but fortunately we didn't.
Several of these initiatives you listed require committee structure and administration. How do you see that being set up?
And that's a question as far as how, moving forward, if we were to meet again in 2017 and 2018, I propose that to everybody here. If we were to select officers, perhaps I think we'd want to set up some type of a voting process, or even decide which officers, which positions we would want to fill. Talking about a journal, we would want an editor, we would want a book review editor, and there would be a couple other positions that we would need to create. There's obviously there's such a long way to go, but I thought it was important since we're all here, and many of us never met face to face. We knew of each other, we communicated through email for years, even decades. But I think now that we're all together, we have the opportunity to continue this conversation and build on the successful work that's been put in place this year and also last year.
So I want to thank Dan, first of all, for being here. And finally, we met for lunch after literally those decades.
That's right.
We've been back and forth on a number of other people. But putting out food for thought, this is exactly what I wanted a keynote to do, to give us some ideas for moving forward. We do have a date for 2017. We haven't gone past 18, again, because we were pleasantly surprised and pleased that this is turning out to be something far more successful earlier. We're at now where we thought we'd be in 4 or 5 years. In fact, we have Dan here. We have all these other people Mark, and on and on. You know, Aldo, Steph. Yeah, it's just it's amazing to us, and the wonderful people who show up to these talks and carry that back. Again, we are taken, I think, by surprise by the fact that we seem to be touching some type of a nerve, or we're reaching out and actually having people reach back. So I think this is great food for thought. These are things that we need to discuss. We'll probably find time, but without that type of thinking, we'll sink like everybody else has. I see the Michael R. Argetsinger Symposium for International Motor Racing History 10, 15 years down the road. I probably won't be here, but I've got people lined up. Paul, Dan, go around the room. We want to pass it on. That's something that motor racing doesn't do well in many cases. But I want to pass this on, and I want to, like Andrew, I want graduate students. When I was a young graduate student, I really didn't have an interest in military history. I became a military historian. Why? Because someone took the time and interest. So that's the sort of thing we're doing. Motor racing, excellent theme of what does this teach us about ourselves? And again, I keep coming back to the cultural turn. That is a key that allows us to start asking that question, and maybe floundering at first, and maybe a little bit better later on, finding some of those answers, or a multitude of answers is probably what it's really going to be. So thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate it so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
We will take a quick break, and then Viva l'Italia. It would be great. We have the Italians coming up, and Pat will be handling that.